Unscripted,
Unbound.
unconditional.
Welcome to the Well Unfiltered.
I'm Mindy,
I'm Nicole,
and we are the hosts of the Well Unfiltered podcast.
where each episode you'll hear unscripted faith stories that will make you think.
Unbound life lessons that will crack you up. I'm talking adjust your waistband laughter.
But most of all, unconditional grace and love that will help you connect to God and to other women.
Welcome to the Well.
Unfiltered.
Well, welcome back to the Well Unfiltered podcast. My name is Mindy,
My name is Nicole.
and we are excited about our topic today because today we are talking about COVID bodies. And no, not antibodies. Those are important, but are a subject that I do not know enough about to
I need
talk
to
about.
pause parenthetically and thank you for that. There was a
Yes.
pun there. And as a super cheesy person, that really spoke to my soul. So thank you for that.
You're
Not
so welcome.
antibodies, but COVID bodies.
But COVID
okay,
bodies.
We can continue.
So, what we're talking about today is sort of how our body image, our relationship to our body, maybe even the way that our bodies look, has shifted, changed, been in flux since COVID started. Mm-hmm. And I think before we really get into the conversation today, I have to put, the disclaimer out there because I know when we talk about anything to do with our body image, weight, anything like that, that can bring up just a whole host of reminders, of triggers, of past hurt for people. So if that is a place where you find yourself, we will not be offended if you turn us off for this week. That's okay. We want this to be a space where we can speak honestly, but also where you feel like you don't have to have those really hard traumatic things dredged up.
Right. Because being unfiltered doesn't mean that we lose care and sight of one another's needs. And it's kind of like that person that will say, I'm really straightforward or blunt. And what they are is uncaring or rude.
Right.
And there's a difference. So I appreciate you putting that disclaimer out there.
Yeah. So as we look at this idea of COVID bodies, I've been thinking about how did we get here? Why are we even talking about this? As we talked about things that we wanted to address in an unfiltered way, this was one of the first things that came to my mind was how we are kind of coping, feeling, looking after we've been through this year, almost 2 years, of, this collective trauma of the pandemic. So as we're looking at COVID bodies, I think for me, when I think about this, I think about the ways that my actual physical body has changed since 2019. And if you were with us for the OG Well on Facebook, you know that we did like all these episodes about self-care.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that?
I was here for
It was
all
in
of
our
them.
basement,
Yes.
in my basement.
Yes,
where
it
we
was.
filmed
Our
it.
basement, where I live.
We share a basement. But we filmed this episode. I remember like being so proud and being like, I get up at 4:45 and I work out and I do all this stuff and it's great and all the things. And then COVID happened and it was like record scratch. All of that stopped. All of the self-care that I was doing just like totally changed. And for me, that meant that my body changed. And so I've spent the last probably 6 to 8 months trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean to live in this skin now and care for myself in a different way because the world has totally changed. What is that phrase, COVID bodies, which I don't know if we made that up or if that's a thing, but
I think if we
it's
did,
fine.
we need to hurry up and get the merch out
We
there.
sure
and get
do.
the copyright.
Yes.
But I think what it means to me is almost emerging after taking the mask off. Because I felt like COVID was not only this time of isolation physically from people, but even when we did show up in limited spaces, there was some part of ourself that was covered. And now I think as we take off that mask, both literally and figuratively, embracing what is there and whether that fits certain standards that we've set for ourselves or standards that we feel like other people are expecting of us. And I leaned in hard to a totally different lifestyle while I was trying to manage e-learning for 3 children. And it did not include putting my body at the top of the priority list. And so I think the biggest challenge for me is being able to accept my body as it is now, and also to have grace for this collective trauma that you're talking about, because I don't think we've really wrestled with how that experience has shaped us, not only physically, but spiritually and mentally, and that our bodies can be reflections of that.
Yeah, it's almost like we went through this very hard, scary, just impossible thing, and we were all expected to just be fine
Yeah.
on the other side. Like everything was supposed to stay the same, even though literally nothing was the same or
Right.
nothing was right. I mean, you talked about e-learning. You know, I think about all the parents who were at home for a whole year trying to educate their kids and work full time or just like stay sane. I think about, you know, the extroverts in the room who had to work from home and their Zoom for months, and just
Yeah.
how hard that was. Like it felt impossible to sort of anchor into the things that made us well.
And I think another narrative that I saw a lot around social media in particular was that, what were you doing with this time?
Did you get a hobby?
Oh, not only did I like start becoming an unofficial HGTV host in every room of my house, but then there was this pressure that you need to come out better than this. I even heard sermons
Yes.
around that, okay, the world is changing. How are you going to use this time and be better or different?
And you know, I kind of like 2019 me. Can I just say that? Like,
Say more about that.
well, that was definitely the narrative. And there were things that I saw that I wanted to change during the pandemic, like overscheduling, things like that. But there are parts of my 2019 self that I do miss. I miss some of those routines and some of the ways that, you know, there were just casual friendships. Like, what's that anymore?
Yeah.
You know, I miss some of that stuff. And so it was funny that in the pandemic, we pivoted to, we got to fix all this stuff. I'm like, but what if some of it was okay?
And I wonder, for those that are tuning in, whether you're joining us on YouTube or you're listening in your car, to really think about what that term COVID body brings up for you. Because I do think that it strikes every person in a different place and brings up different feelings. And as you talk about, you know, where we are and some of those narratives, you know, I wonder how you would describe that pivot for you after. So we're in the pre, post, pre, maybe, and not so sure pandemic
Something.
phase.
Yeah.
What does COVID body mean now?
Yeah, so it takes me back to the doctor's office for my last physical. And I was there and she was looking at my chart and she looks at me and goes, Mindy, we did so well last year. What happened? And my first thought was like, you were there. Like, did you get up early and exercise with me? I missed you, but it's a dark room. It's fine. Maybe you were on the other side. I don't know.
Actually, your doctor and I were together because we were doing
really?
nothing. Yes, we were together.
We should have hung out. It would have been great. But then, you know, with her saying like, what happened? I just thought, have you been in this office? Like, am I breaking the news to you? The world is ending. Like, that's what's happening. But I remember in that moment thinking, wow, this feels like very shameful and very hard for me because like my body has changed and it's being called out by this person. But what is this saying about sort of us as a people? Like, what are her own maybe, you know, issues or baggage that she's projecting? And what does it say that I can't just say like, wow, I'm making it. Like, we're keeping our kids healthy and happy. Like, we still got our jobs, we still got our health. What would it look like for me to appreciate what my body is like now instead of just yearning for a time that just doesn't exist anymore?
And I think what may be underneath that is this cultural obsession with living through difficult things and the refusal to accept that our bodies reflect what we've been through.
Yes, because it's like they're supposed to just exist independently
Yes.
of all that stuff.
Yes. And so because that is biologically impossible, then we carry shame and stigma when our bodies do what they naturally do, which is reflect what we've been through. And I think that that's why it's so important for us to examine this in this season where we've had this collective trauma, because if we're not careful, we can believe that narrative that, yes, a global pandemic that shut down the world happened, and it changed my entire life and work rhythm. It changed my relationships with my neighbors, my family, my government, everything. And that should not have any effect on my physical body. And for us to not be able to embrace that is denying ourselves not only a certain grace, but also a certain healing that we need to get through this pre-post, we're not sure, hopefully, end of the pandemic.
Yeah, it makes me think about, this theology of being embodied. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I was growing up in sort of my formative years, there was almost this narrative of, you've got your spirit, your soul, your spiritual self. And then unfortunately, you have this body that's attached to it.
Yes.
And I'm so sorry about it, but your body is problematic in so many ways. And someday you get to die, leave that body behind, and then go to
Right.
heaven where things are actually
Right.
great.
Right.
And that is such I think, a harmful theology, especially for women, because our bodies are on one end, they're like vilified, and then they're like objectified and put on this pedestal. And so
Right.
what in the world do you do with your body? But, I think I was telling you about, like, I've been listening to, reading a little bit of Dr. Hillary McBride, and, like, that's her whole thing, is that, like, our bodies are us. And it's not an accident that we ended up in these bodies. And so the way that we tend to them, the way that we give them grace, the way that we talk to them, it matters.
Yeah. I mean, even hearing that makes me think of, Jesus returning after the resurrection and showing up in that physical body. We know that Jesus wasn't limited by that. Jesus could have done all kinds of things. If it was me, I mean, I would have definitely had one of those wind machines with my hair like that. That's how I would arrive
whole look,
post-resurrection.
yes.
But it was important to not only show up in that body, but to show that scarred body reflecting the experience of the crucifixion. And we deny ourselves that. And that's what God shows us, that we can live this embodied life, and that embodied life can be a place of healing and resurrection and faith, as opposed to a place of shame or a place where we are shamed by others. And I wonder, as people are listening, and what are some of the ways that you have been able to, you're sitting in the doctor's office and she's Mindie. How did you move? For some of us, when we get feedback like that, it's hard to move on in a positive way with our bodies. How were you able to move forward?
Well, I think as I sat there, I thought, okay, I'm pretty annoyed by this conversation. But at the same time, it is a reminder that, I feel like I had to do a check of myself. Like, okay, how am I feeling in my body? How am I also feeling in my soul and in my mental health? Because I do think, for me at least, those things all interlock. So, half the reason I would get on a stationary bike in the way too early hours of the morning is because it helped a lot with my anxiety. It helped a lot with my mood. And so I looked at that and I thought, oh yeah, during COVID, it was this high anxiety time, and I wasn't using the tools that I have to help, manage that. And so in some ways that was a good reminder for me, but it maybe like checked the reason. Like, okay, you, doctor, who really, she's not that bad, but like, you may not be happy with the numbers, with the chart that you're seeing, but it's really not about that. It's about, am I happy with the ways that I'm tending to this one body, this one spirit that my God has given me for this one life? And so I tried to take it and say, okay, like, where's the truth here? Where do I need to just kind of be like, okay, you can talk to your people about your things and let that go. But where can I find the actual truth that can be helpful?
Yeah. It makes me think of probably the biggest shift I made in COVID, and I wish I would have made a shift towards a stationary bike. The Lord has not provided that revelation for me. I did get the revelation to buy the Peloton. It just hasn't moved in my spirit yet to use it consistently. So I'm waiting on the Holy Spirit. But this is what the biggest shift in my body was actually, for several months. I worked out of my house. I've been working. My first job was at 13, and I remember putting on this little JCPenney suit, which
Can we have
has
some
shoulder
pictures in the
pads.
show
Oh
notes?
yes, I was a receptionist at my mother's office, and I remember straightening my hair to go into this professional setting. And I would say that for most of my life, there was the way you look at home, which is crazy and natural and whatever. And then there's the way you present yourself in the world. And that always included altering or adding something, whether that was makeup or changing the texture of my hair. And during COVID is probably the longest period of time I did not wear makeup. And part of it that was so marvelous was just not spending the time. Like, I'm sleeping until the 20-minute alarm and I have to be on Zoom. That's very different than waking up an hour before and getting all the kids ready and getting yourself ready. But I think I became more at home in my natural body, to the point that when it was time to go back to work, I was like, oh, well, like it was hard to be, to conform maybe to some of those expectations again. And I have maintained really usually one office day a week where I literally show up in my full all natural makeupless self. And I enjoy that. I enjoy not preparing to meet the standard of beauty that I think is expected. And then on the flip side of that is I love makeup. I think it's fun. But I do it when I want to do it, as opposed to I must wear this in order to be in this setting. And so while I think COVID has challenged us physically and spiritually, there are some things that were a gift during that time period that I learned through my body and this season, and that's one of them. Are there gifts that you will take from this experience? This sounds terrible, of our collective trauma. From this COVID body that you have, that we both have, that all of us have.
Yeah. I think, you talked a little bit about Jesus showing up with scars. And then as I think about this, I go back to the creation story and how God makes this human body. And then God says, it's very good. And I love that pronouncement. And it makes me think, like, what does God think when God sees our bodies, our lives? I just don't think God looks at us and is like, well, you gained 10 pounds during COVID. It's not good anymore. I think that is a real lie. And so for me, it's sort of having maybe some more generous grace for my body, and that it does a lot of great things. It gets me from point A to point B. It laughs, it loves, it exists in this world in a way that it only can. And that's a very good thing. And it's not only good if it is a certain number or a certain size. And I think that is sort of like the narrative that we can believe.
Yeah.
And it's not true.
I think that is the work for us after this episode, that for everyone who is listening or watching, that you need to find that space where You can say it out loud without anyone interrupting or asking, who are you talking to?
I'm talking to myself.
And literally look at your body and pronounce over it what God has pronounced over it. It is very good. And that is such a powerful reminder. I'm so grateful that, literally, that I'm thinking, I not only need to say that, there are some people I need to say that to, that need to hear that reminder in this season. And as you share that, it made me think of another, I think, gift I've learned during this season. I know more about our immune systems than I ever did before. I mean, you can basically call me an infectious disease doctor at this point, based on my Google degree. And
It is esteemed, well earned.
And I remember my stepfather had COVID and was in the hospital and in ICU and on a breathing machine. And at one point, my mother called and said, he cannot catch his breath to talk on the phone, and we're worried that we're going to lose him. And I, for the first time, started, as he, thank God, recovered from that later, I started to thank God for our interior bodies and the design that God has given us in these immune systems in ways that I've never been grateful for our interior bodies before, because all of the focus is on what we can see on the outside. And really taking time not only to say, this body looks good, because that's often what we mean when we say it is good, but really that it is good because of the way that God has designed it to be well. And really starting to, I remember some brilliant pastor had this prayer over every cell in your immune system, just taking the time to really break down all of the things that are a part of our wellness that God has put inside of us that we don't even know are fighting for our good. And I think that this conversation enlists us in the opportunity to join our own kind of spiritual immune system. I get to say that this body is good. It's good on the inside. It's good on the outside. And it's good because God made it that way.
And think about the impact if we collectively spoke those words or had that posture about our bodies, about the people that we love and care about and do life with. I just feel like what impact would that have on our communities and us as people of faith?
It would, and I don't mean this in a contrite way, it would literally change the world if people could actually love the bodies that they have. I mean, so many products, so many everything that we often see advertised is about changing our bodies. And if we had this radical self-acceptance and self-appreciation, that would be a life-changing and world-changing idea. And I think it does start with us accepting that idea for ourselves. And it starts in the conversation that we have after this. I mean, I was sharing with you, Mindie, that I went to this tea, and there was this really nice and welcoming woman who was telling us about, the conversation started when we were in our 20s, the things we got to do in our 20s, like sleep and enjoy quiet time, like all fantasy now. And one of the things she brought up was that she worked out daily. And she said, well, now I have an elliptical. I know I don't look like it. And it was just this immediate bomb dropped in the room. And I think that one of the things that we have to do, if we're going to shift this narrative, is take those opportunities to shift the narrative. And I simply said to her, don't say that. And then it was a little awkward.
Because you're like, hey, we just met.
I'm telling you what to say. But honestly, your I think that your body looks like a body that's on the elliptical every day. This body hasn't been on an elliptical in decades. So I'm going to tell you that, and you can tell your truth, and they can both be good. And I wonder if there's something else that you might share for us to kind of move closer to that self-acceptance.
Yeah, I think it really goes back to the power of the words that we use. So either our words to other people or our words to ourselves. Like I think about the way that sometimes we just almost without thinking we comment on people's appearance or their weight. And I just every time I hear that, part of me just cringes inside because I think you don't know the story of the person you're talking to. You don't know what even that compliment might flare up in them. So I think it's being mindful of that and the way that we talk to people. But I also think it's mindful of how we talk to ourselves. You know, I think about my body post 2 kids, and it looks nothing like the body before. And it was actually funny, last year, whenever our 10-year anniversary was, you know, we're supposed to go on this big trip, didn't happen, COVID, thanks. So I thought it'd be really funny to like pull my wedding dress out and, you know, take a picture in it. And I took a picture in it with holding the back because it does not fit. Like, why would it fit? It's 10 years later. And I remember someone commented on the picture and said, "Wow, you can still fit in your dress." I was like, "No, I can't." And it's okay that I can't. There's no shame there because this body now tells a story, and it's a story I wouldn't want to untell just to fit in that dress.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like looking at where we are in our body and finding gratitude about that and remembering that these bodies tell stories and they're our stories and really they're God's story.
Yeah.
And that's a really holy thing.
Well, I think that might be a place where we might close this episode and inviting our listeners to think about the story that your body tells. Some of us have stories of survival with our bodies, stories of grace, stories of ridiculous laughter. I mean, we'll have to come back to the time I moonlit as a liturgical dancer in this body, and that is a whole episode.
That is a whole episode.
It might be called imposter syndrome. No, it's not a syndrome. No, you really are.
You were an imposter.
But as we do every episode, when we think about this with COVID bodies, we always close with that question, what's filling your well? What's filling your well, Mindie?
Yeah, when I think about my body, the thing that's filling my well is something that's very unexpected to me, which has been lifting heavy weights.
Well, that's unexpected to me.
Unexpected at all times. No, so like as part of my, you know, re-engagement in self-care, my husband and I have been getting up and doing strength workouts together. And I love it because strong was never a word I would use to describe myself ever in my entire life. Like I always, you know, I just felt like I needed people to do those things for me. And I don't need that as much now. And that is filling my well. Like I'm like, I can lift that. I do not need someone to do that. And so, I don't know. It's been kind of a source of joy in a very weird and unexpected place for me. But what about you?
So this is harder because I told you the Lord is still revealing the plan for physical activity. But I will say, in my house, I think because of my stubbornness around exercise, our kids are all really great athletes. And what's so weird about my resistance to physical activity before is that I was a basketball player, field hockey player, lacrosse player, and loved sports. But I realized I loved being on the team in competition and having we're trying to win the game. Wait, exercising on my own? What? There's no game? There's no medal? Oh, God. So I think my son has been asking me, will you go outside and practice soccer with me? And it is a horrible experience. I know, first of all, the weather is terrible.
Yeah, it's rained. Like, we're in Indiana, and it's rained most of October.
Yeah, and I just feel like sports should be canceled, but they haven't done that.
No, they don't do that.
And just what I've realized is that it's not maybe similar to what you are talking about with your strength training. It's not just the change it's making in your body, but also what else is being built. And you're getting up and doing strength training with your husband. I'm sure that there's some strength training in your partnership and your friendship with one another.
Yeah, we laugh at ourselves.
I'm sure. And I feel that with my son. We were talking about doing some kind of trick. Yeah, I had to sit down and catch my breath, but I felt this strengthening in our relationship. And I think that's why I want to keep filling my well with more ways to connect with the people that I love through exercise and physical activity.
I mean, if you're not watching on YouTube, your face right now is telling a story.
You said our bodies tell stories,
Yes,
right, Mindy?
yes. Also, our faces are part of our bodies, and they tell a lot of stories.
Yes. So I hope that for those that are listening, that this is an opportunity to tell your story, and we want to hear your story. So, connect with us at the Well Unfiltered on Instagram, on Facebook. We have a TikTok account, but we're trying to work up to that level of
Are
coolness.
we supposed to do a dance?
I don't see that requires physical activity. So
let us know if you want to see that. It will be Nicole's like, do not let us know if you want to see that.
Send us a message. We'll see you on the next episode of The Well. Thanks, Mindy.